In a city where justice and love rarely coexist, one man is forced to confront the ghosts of his past. Bronson, a dedicated black police officer, has spent years trying to mend the broken relationship between law enforcement and his community. But love becomes his greatest challenge when he falls for Remi, a fiery activist and the daughter of a man wronged by the very system he serves. As the past resurfaces and tensions escalate, Bronson and Remi must decide: can love truly redeem, or will justice demand its price? Bronson had always believed in the law. It wasn't perfect, but it was supposed to protect people. He joined the force to make a difference, to be the kind of officer who treated his community with respect. But in this city, respect was a currency not quickly earned. As he walked into the precinct that morning, his partner Derek slapped a case file onto his desk. "Another protest at City Hall today. Guess who's leading it?" Branson didn't have to guess. He had seen Remi Carter's face on the news before, strong-willed, fearless, and relentless in her pursuit of justice. She wasn't just any activist. She was the daughter of Michael Carter, a man who had once been wrongfully arrested by officers from this department, a case that had forever changed the city. "Command wants us there," Derek said. "Things might get heated." When Bronson arrived at the protest, the streets were filled with people demanding justice. The energy was raw and powerful, and at the center of it all, Remi. Their eyes met. For a split second, the noise around them faded. Bronson saw fire in her gaze, a deep mistrust she wasn't trying to hide. To her, he wasn't just another officer. He was part of the system she had spent years fighting. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, she turned away, lifting a megaphone. "No more empty promises," her voice rang out. "We demand accountability." The crowd erupted in agreement. Bronson exhaled, gripping his badge tightly. This wasn't just another case. It was personal. And for the first time, he wasn't sure where he stood. The protest ended without violence, but Bronson couldn't shake the encounter. Remi Carter. She wasn't just another activist. She was a woman carrying the weight of her father's past, a past that still haunted the police department. Back at the precinct, Bronson stared at an old case file. Michael Carter, arrested 15 years ago for a crime he didn't commit. The officers who arrested him fabricated evidence, and by the time the truth came out, Michael had already spent years behind bars. The city settled a lawsuit, but no money could erase what had been done. Bronson was only a rookie, watching from the sidelines as corruption played out before him. He did nothing. The weight of his inaction, the guilt of not standing up for what was right, was a burden he carried every day. And now, fate had brought him face to face with Michael's daughter, a woman with whom he couldn't help but feel a deep personal connection. Later that evening, he found himself at a small cafe near downtown. It was known as a hub for activists, and he wasn't surprised when Remi walked in. She paused when she saw him, but didn't turn away. Instead, she sat at a table across from him, folding her arms. "You following me now, officer?" Her voice was sharp, guarded. Bronson exhaled, setting his coffee down. "Number just needed some air." Remi studied him for a long moment. "So, what is it? You here to intimidate me?" He shook his head. "I'm not that kind of cop." She scoffed. "They all say that." Bronson leaned forward. "Remi, I know what happened to your father, and I know nothing can make it right. But not all of us were part of that." Her expression softened, just slightly. "Then why do you still wear that badge?" "Because I want to be different. I want to change what this uniform stands for." Remi let out a bitter laugh. "You think one cop can change the system?" Bronson hesitated. "I think we all have to start somewhere." She studied him again, something unreadable in her gaze. Then, for the first time, her voice lowered. "My father never trusted the police after what happened. I never thought I would either." Something in her tone made Bronson realize she wanted to believe in change, even if she didn't know how. The tension between them shifted. Bronson wasn't just another cop. And maybe, just maybe, Remi wasn't just another protester. This was something else. something neither of them was ready to admit yet. Bronson couldn't stop thinking about Remi. Their conversation at the cafe played on repeat in his mind. He had expected hostility, but he saw something else in her eyes. Pain wrapped in anger, hope buried under years of disappointment. He sat at his desk at the precinct, staring at an old case report. The details of Michael Carter's wrongful arrest were all there, a reminder of how a system built to protect had failed. The officers involved were either retired or had moved on, but their actions still left scars on the Carter family. Bronson questioned whether he was doing enough for the first time in his career. Could he change things from the inside? Or was he just another cog in a broken machine? A knock on his office door snapped him from his thoughts. His partner, Detective Marcus Lane, leaned against the doorway. "You good, man?" Marcus asked, noticing Bronson's distant look. Bronson hesitated before speaking. "Do you remember the Michael Carter case?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That was before our time." "Why?" Bronson ran a hand over his face. "I met his daughter. She was at the protest." Marcus sighed, stepping inside. "Look, I get it. That case was messed up. But what can you do now? It's not like we can rewrite history." "Maybe not," Bronson said, "but I can make sure something like that never happens again." Marcus shook his head. "You think one good cop is enough to fix this department?" Bronson met his gaze. "I think it's a start." Later that night, Bronson found himself outside a community center where activists held a town hall meeting. He had no idea what he was doing there, only that he needed to see Remi again. Inside, the discussion was intense. People shared their experiences with police brutality, racial profiling, and systemic injustice. Bronson felt like an outsider in his city. Then he saw her. Remi stood at the front, speaking with conviction. "We don't just need apologies. We need accountability. Change doesn't come from words. It comes from action." When she finished, she stepped down, scanning the crowd. Her eyes landed on Bronson. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, Remi walked toward him. "You showed up," she said, crossing her arms. Bronson nodded. "I told you, I want to be different." She studied him for a long moment before sighing. "Then prove it." And just like that, Bronson realized this was more than unfinished business. This was the beginning of something bigger. Bronson sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his badge on the nightstand. It felt heavier than usual, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. For years, he had believed in the good of the system. But now, after meeting Remi and hearing her words, he couldn't longer ignore the cracks. He wanted to prove to her and himself that he could be different, that he could be the kind of cop who made a difference. The following day, he arrived at the precinct with renewed purpose. He walked straight to Captain Reynolds' office and knocked firmly. "Come in," the older man called. Bronson stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Captain, I must talk to you about some old cases." Reynolds leaned back in his chair. "Which ones?" Bronson hesitated, then said, "Michael Carter's wrongful arrest." The captain's expression darkened. "That case is closed, Bronson." "With all due respect, sir, it shouldn't be," Bronson pressed. "An innocent man lost years of his life because of bad policing. If we don't acknowledge that, we're no better than the ones who did it." Reynolds sighed, rubbing his temples. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Bronson took a deep breath. "I want access to the files. I want to see if there's something, anything, we can do to clear his record officially." Reynolds stared at him for a long time. "You realize that digging into this case could put a target on your back, right? The involved guys may be gone, but their allies aren't." "I understand," Bronson said firmly, "but I can't look the other way anymore." Reynolds studied him before finally nodding. "Fine, but you do this on your own time. And Bronson, be careful." That evening, Bronson found himself back at the community center. This time, he wasn't just there to listen. He was there to act. He spotted Remi talking with a small group of activists. When she saw him, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You again?" she said. Bronson nodded. "I looked into your father's case. I have access to the files." Remi's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around the notebook she held. "And I want to help." Remi searched his face for any sign of deception. Finally, she exhaled. "Then you'd better be ready for a fight." A small smile tugged at the corner of Bronson's lips. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." For the first time, Remi didn't look at him with anger or distrust. For the first time, there was hope. Bronson spent the next few days buried in case files, old reports, witness statements, and arrest records. Each document painted a clearer picture of what had happened to Michael Carter. And the more he read, the more disgusted he felt. The arrest had been based on nothing but racial profiling and fabricated evidence. At night, he met with Remi at the community center to review his findings. Their unlikely partnership had turned into a mission. "This is enough to push for an official review," Bronson said, spreading the documents on the table. "We have proof that the arrest was wrongful." Remi studied the papers, her jaw tightening. "And you think the department is just going to admit it?" Bronson exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "No, but if we make enough noise, they'll have no choice." Remi looked at him for a long moment. "You're risking everything for this," she finally said. Bronson met her gaze. "So are you." The air between them shifted, no longer filled with tension, but with an unspoken understanding. The next day, Remi published an article exposing the flaws in the case. It was bold, raw, and backed by undeniable evidence. Within hours, it gained traction online, drawing attention from activists and legal experts. At the precinct, Bronson felt the weight of every stare as he walked through the halls. He knew what they were thinking: traitor. Reynolds called him into his office. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Bronson stood tall. "I did the right thing." Reynolds sighed, shaking his head. "There are people in this department who won't let this go, Bronson. Watch your back." Bronson nodded, but he wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, he felt like an honest cop. Not just someone enforcing the law, but fighting for justice. Remi found him outside the community center that evening, leaning against his car. "They put your article on the news," he told her with a slight smirk. She crossed her arms. "Yeah, and I've already gotten threats." Bronson's jaw tightened. "You're not alone in this, Remi." She sighed, looking at him. "I know. That's what scares me." There was no hostility in her voice for the first time, only concern. And for the first time, Bronson realized this wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about her. Bronson knew the backlash was coming, but didn't expect it to hit so fast. The morning after Remi's article went viral, he walked into the precinct to find his locker vandalized. Red spray paint spelled out one word: traitor. Whispers followed him down the hallway, and when he sat at his desk, an officer nearby muttered just loud enough for him to hear, "Guess he forgot which side he's on." Bronson clenched his jaw but didn't react. They could hate him, but they couldn't stop the truth. Meanwhile, Remi faced her battles. Her inbox was flooded with hate mail. Some messages were just insults, but others carried threats. There were anonymous emails and blocked numbers. She sat in her car outside her apartment, gripping the steering wheel. Was she in over her head? Her phone rang. "Bronson." "You okay?" he asked as soon as she picked up. She hesitated. "Define okay." His silence told her he understood. "Meet me at the diner," he said. "I'm on my way." They sat in the back corner of the small, dimly lit diner, a safe distance from prying eyes. "You can still walk away from this," Bronson said. "They're coming after you hard." Remi shook her head. "And let them win?" "Not a chance." Bronson studied her, admiration flickering in his eyes. She wasn't just fighting for her father. She was fighting for justice, truth, and change. He exhaled. "They're trying to push me out of the force, maybe suspend me." Remi tensed. Are you serious? He nodded. They haven't pulled the trigger yet, but it's coming. She frowned. This isn't fair. You're trying to fix what they broke. Bronson smirked, a tired look in his eyes. The system doesn't like being exposed. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Remi reached across the table and took his hand. I don't know where this is going, she said softly, but I know we're in this together. Bronson looked at their hands, her fingers warm against his. A part of him still fought against this connection, this unexpected bond, but another part of him, one he could no longer ignore, needed it, needed her. For the first time in years, he wasn't just following orders. He was standing for something real. And for the first time, he wasn't standing alone. Bronson stood outside the precinct, staring at the imposing glass doors. His entire career had been shaped within those walls, but now, the place felt foreign and hostile. Inside, he knew the department was preparing to push him out. He had heard whispers about an internal review, a possible suspension. They wanted him gone. He took a deep breath and walked in. Every pair of eyes turned toward him. Some officers looked away. Others stared him down, their expressions a mixture of anger and betrayal. He was no longer one of them. Meanwhile, Remi was facing her battle. She had agreed to a live interview with a national news station, knowing it would put an even bigger target on her back. As the cameras rolled, the anchor asked, You've uncovered a case of police misconduct that many believe was intentionally buried. Are you afraid? Remi didn't hesitate. I'm not afraid of the truth. What happened to my father wasn't just a mistake. It was a cover-up. And if we don't hold the system accountable, it will keep happening. The interview went viral within hours. The public was divided. Some praised her courage, while others called her a liar and an agitator. The police department, however, had heard enough. Bronson was called into the captain's office. You're done, Captain Reynolds said, not even looking up from his paperwork. Turn in your badge and gun. Bronson had expected this, but it still hit him like a punch to the gut. This isn't about me, he said. It's about the truth. Reynolds sighed. Maybe, but the department doesn't like officers who turn on their own. Bronson placed his badge and gun on the desk. Then maybe I was never really one of you. As he walked out, the weight on his chest felt lighter. He had lost his job, but he had found his purpose. That night, he met Remi at the spot where it all started, the memorial where her father's name was etched into stone. You did it, he said. You got them to listen. Remi shook her head. We did it. They stood in silence for a moment, the city buzzing around them. Then, slowly, Bronson reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. They had chosen each other in a world that had tried to keep them apart. And no matter what came next, they would face it together.
Enjoyed this story? Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales. Let's spread the message of hope and unity together. Thanks, and take care.